increasing the resiliency. Oh, nice.
Hmm.
No, that's great. That's
Okay, good.
always great. Great to connect with you all. And let me, without further ado, I'll share my slides here. It's this is always the moment of truth when they come online. Ideally, here we go. How's that for everybody? Is everyone seeing that?
I think
Loading.
so.
There we go. Okay. And how is sound wise? Does that sound all right to everybody?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. It's such a treat, and I am excited to just dive right in. My talk is about both the small scale things that you can do and also the training you can kind of give yourself right in your backyard, but also how it can apply to larger scale or it's scalable as well. And so it's just I think there's so much you can do right where you are, and I think that it's with a lot of the climactic stuff in the world and all these different things, it can be easy to get discouraged. But I think also there's an enormous capacity if we kind of are able to lean into and not forget right where we are, from the bugs to the different types of soil, and just starting where right below your feet. So,
I can't see your slides yet.
oh, they can't.
It says
Interesting.
it's loading.
It's loading.
Yeah.
My God. Let me see if I can plug in an extra. That's good to know. Thank you. It's still loading?
It says loading, yeah.
Okay, let me see, because this might be an internet issue. Let me just try this. See if this works. 1 second. All right. I'm going to try. Let's try that. Okay. How is that good? Can you see slides now?
We can, and I did see them before.
Interesting. Let me stop sharing and share again and see if that
Okay.
helps. And any problems with my. Oh, you know what? It looks like there's two open. Let me just triple check to make sure. Let's try that. Wow. Okay. Let me try one more thing. I'm going to stop the share for just a second and pull up. Let's see. Because it might be, I'm on Safari, so it's possible that
Oh.
it's blocking me for some reason. Let me just pull up my slides in here. 1 second. Thank you all for the patience. Always the technology. I feel like no matter how many times I've done this, it is always something that comes out of the blue and gets me. Here we go. There we go. And I'm plugged in to extra bulked up internet, so we'll see if this helps. And let's see. Here we go. Right, here we go. Make sure that's closed out.
Yeah, that echo sound is back a little bit too, but
It is interesting. Maybe that's the. Let me just triple check everything.
I'm surprised because the slides were up when you and I talked. So,
Yeah, always a challenge.
hmm.
Is the echo still there?
Slightly, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll let's see if I can just make sure. I'm gonna close out of this one. All right, and let's try sharing now. This one looks like it might also be loading. Ooh, I hope this isn't.
Okay, it says started screen sharing.
Okay.
It's loading.
Rust.
Mm.
Otherwise, I'll just have to go on the fly, which I can also do. But it's nice to see pictures.
Yes,
So,
that's unusual.
all right. Okay. Oh, you know what? Maybe.
Do you
Here
want
we
to?
go.
Okay, I was going to say go out and come again, but
Yeah, I can try closing Zoom and then just jumping back in. Does that? Oh,
maybe
is it? You see it now?
yes, we do. It's just starting. Yep, it's there. Yay! Thank you.
Good. Yay! Excellent. Well, it's thank you all for the patience. Again, no matter how many times I do this, I feel like there's always something Unexpected. All right, well, let's dive in because we'll go through. I have a lot of stuff in here, and I'm happy, as I mentioned to Jean, I'm happy to send the slides along. I'll link to them afterwards. There's going to be some videos and other things that you can look at later that are just, a lot of them are very short, but they're kind of fun if you need an extra bit of inspiration or kind of want to dive into a topic a little deeper. So we'll talk through that. Now, one second. Why isn't it letting me
Can you
turn?
hit the arrow on your keyboard?
Yes, I did. And then,
Oh, there
okay,
you go. Okay.
there it is.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully, no other problems. Is the echo still there, or is it okay?
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay. So starting off, just starting right where you are, looking at your soil can tell you a huge amount about what's going on under your feet. And soil has this incredible capacity when it's really healthy to hold water longer in dry spells, to capture carbon. A lot of that dark, rich material is actually carbon. And so when you're looking at soil, that top layer, it's the top soil layer, it is
Now
really...
your slide disappeared.
Your slide disappeared.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Am I going in and out a little bit?
You're okay, but it's just a black screen.
Wow. Okay, let me close out maybe and then come back in for just a minute. And
Sure.
thank you all for the patience. Let me see if I can do it.
Just a moment, Allison, before you
Yes.
leave, if it makes sense to email if possible, to email your slides to Jean or to me so that we can show them for you.
Or if it's a Google slide, the link, and we'll just pull that up.
Oh, we could do that.
Okay. All right.
Okay, let me do that. That would be, actually, that'd be wonderful.
Okay.
We'll make sure, hopefully, all will go smoothly. Here we go. Let's see, let me just get you that one. Here it is. And actually, I'll just share it to you directly.
Are you doing it in an email?
And you know, it's interesting.
Are you doing
I'll do it in the should I do it? Actually, I'll do it via, let's see, here we go. I can do it through Google. Does that make sense? It'll show up through your email.
in my email? Sure. Yep.
Let me do that right now. Here we go. Here we go. Let's try that.
I'm refreshing.
Send it to Jean as well. Hopefully that'll work out all right.
I'm waiting. You sent it to my Divine Native Plantings one?
Yes, if that's...
Yeah,
so
that's good. That's good. I am not seeing it. Let's
see. And I can also put on, let me see, file, edit. Let's see. Here we go. I could also get a...
Okay, I got it.
Perfect,
Okay.
perfect.
All right. Okay.
Well,
So
that's okay. We'll see how it is.
Okay, so file.
Actually, and do you want me to see if I can share it again just in case to
I'm in it. I'm in the slide. Let me just see. Show slideshow. To run it as a slideshow, I'm in the when you get to edit it. So how do I will share my screen, and I am doing that now. All right.
hold it? I'll just keep it up in there.
Okay,
Thank you all.
Do you see it now?
I do. And if you click on the upper right corner, just the slideshow presenter mode, that might do it for you potentially. There you go.
All right, great. So let's go.
Excellent.
Why am I not advanced? I'm trying to advance and I'm hitting, okay. Is that where you want to be? Or
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, no, the details about soil is they have an enormous capacity, as many of you know, to capture carbon. A lot of that dark, rich material is carbon. or is organic matter that has a large portion of carbon in it, the more structure and glues and slimes and all these other things that are in soil, the more it's able to hold water. You can, the more life you have in soil, it kind of feeds every sort of chain up as you go, and so you get this incredible amount of biodiversity that's supported when you have really healthy and biodiverse soils. Your capacity for holding nutrients increases as you kind of grow that topsoil. So thinking about where you are topsoil wise, all you have to do is dig a hole, and you can really get a sense just by the color and the just a lot of these different textures of what's in there. Color is not always an indicator for health, but it oftentimes is. And so it's just helpful to, get in there, get to know what your soil's like. The capacity for a soil to filter, to purify, break down toxins, it's amazing. And so the capacity just in your topsoil is astounding. So, and that whole subsoil as well. So that all of it is being actively, if you can build up this incredible sponge, carbon-rich sponge, then you have this capacity to add a level of resilience to your plants and also to the landscape from flood mitigation, all sorts of different things as well. And next slide.
I just did it, and now it's not. Okay.
So the soil food web, as many of you have probably seen this graphic and know about this, there's lots of different tiers. And one of the things that I will mention is every time you say you have, when you have a very disturbed or degraded soil, or when you first start off with like bare rock, you get a lot of bacteria. And so bacteria are the first ones to come back after a drought. They're really fast to multiply. There are a lot of them. And anytime you have another creature further up on the chain eat a bacteria or eat something lower down on the food chain, it's like ripping open a small fertilizer bag. Nutrients get redistributed. They become bioavailable. There's a lot of different things that happen when you have this diversity of things eating and dying and living and kind of eating each other and all this in the food chain. So the more active your soil food web and the more complex it is, the more you have nutrient cycling happening, the more you also have a lot of these things bound up, the more you're creating soil structure. So you're doing a lot of different things when you have this nice rich complexity in your soil. And so we'll be talking about this and in this context as we go. Next slide. So this is just an interesting graphic about how soils grow or how they form. And it's just really interesting to think about it from the perspective of what does it look like when soils are bare rock. You can also think about it as very degraded, because that's like we've lost topsoil in a lot of places around the world. And then what happens as you go to each level of succession. The thing that is really fascinating, I find, or one of the many things, is that, again, that soil food web becomes much more complex as you get further along. And then also it shifts. So the ratio of bacteria to fungi shift. And so that is, as we are going along, we'll kind of keep coming back to this kind of ratio. And part of the way to increase health in the soil is adding complexity and diversity, and feeding the soil or feeding plants things that encourage that diversity or complexity to jumpstart the next level of succession. Or it's also feeding specifically like fungally dominant things. As we'll talk about a little bit more, fungi are unbelievable partners in the plant world, and they can do an enormous amount of stuff for you in the soil, including, as many of you probably have heard, this forest wide web where plants and trees and all different types of things will connect with each other through these underground mycelial roots. And so there's lots of communication that happens, as well as nutrient transfer and a lot of partnerships that happen underground. Next slide. So the first kind of stage that we'll talk about is this idea of bare rock. So it's bare rock or extremely degraded soil. Think about really light color. So there's not a lot of organic matter. There's not a large amount of life. So it's very minimal and also very stressed. So when the sun hits it, it gets really hot. It can't sustain a huge amount of life. The things that tend to live in this environment, like think about sand grains, what can live in between sand grains, and it's things like algae or lichen or all these kind of different types of bacteria that can handle this really tricky environment. So lichen is one of those really fascinating organisms that's algae and fungi combined. So the algae photosynthesizes, the fungi eat rocks, literally. So they can kind of partner back and forth together. And that is part of the way that nutrient cycling happens. It's highly bacterially dominant, but it's also pretty resilient. That's perfect. So the one of the things that you might do if you have really bare, really tough soil, and another way that this can happen is if you have, for example, certain types of pesticides are sprayed on landscapes that stop growth. So for example, there are some areas, or like for example, mining tailings or other things where it's extreme conditions. And so one way to get things to grow is to put something on it, say like molasses, to basically directly feed the bacteria sugar and nutrients is a way to jumpstart a really, really degraded landscape. And so just enough to start getting things to grow, getting things mobilized, that's one way to very quickly do that, especially if you think that maybe pesticides or something has been sprayed on an area. That can be helpful for degraded areas. Adding organic matter like compost is another way to jumpstart that biology. Using any kind of amount of carbon. So that one of my favorite ways of building soil, and I've seen people do this on asphalt, is they take layers of compost and layers of wood chips and just layer them on top of each other. And as long as you don't disturb the wood chips and let them kind of go stable, that can melt into soil within a single season. It's unbelievable if you have the right biology and you have a good quality compost. So there's a lot of things. This is an example right here of lasagna mulch, which is lots of different things, smush, like all these different materials that feed this complex biology. However, it doesn't have to be this exact recipe. This is just one example. You can make soil very quickly. I've seen someone make soil with just wood chips, and then she planted peas into them. So she didn't have enough funds to get compost. She just put in wood chips and planted peas, which are nitrogen fixers, and she got the biology started that way. And so it's amazing what can happen in a very short amount of space. So, and then that can work out pretty well. So that's one to consider. And as we go through each of these sections, we're going to talk about the stage and then also things to consider to bump or adjust it. And so like we'll talk about traits about each stage and then also how to think about working with this concept of succession, because succession is incredibly powerful once you start to get to know it. So if you see, for example, a tree with a lot of early succession weeds underneath it, that tree is most likely pretty stressed. And so you can start to read landscapes and read what's happening based on what the plants are telling you in a landscape, which is unbelievably cool to be able to read the soil like that. Weeds are one of those plants that are incredible for telling you something about the soil. So think about a lot of our scenarios or places where the soil is extremely degraded for some reason. This can happen on a large scale, desertification-wise, around the world, or it can happen in a very small scale in a backyard or along a train station line or anything like that. And so every single weed is a hyperaccumulator. They tend to have a specific types of weeds will show up when the soil is missing a certain spectrum of nutrients. So the type of weeds and kind of how they grow will tell you a bit about the soil. And you don't have to tissue sample every single weed out there to get to know this, but there are a couple kind of just keep in mind or start noticing some of these things. Some weeds are extremely salt tolerant, for example, and it might tell you a little bit about what's happening, or like have deep tap roots. They can deal with compaction. There's lots of different skills that these weeds bring in. And so this is just the dandelion is one of those examples. It has a deep taproot. It can break up compaction. It's a nectar source. It has lots of seeds, which are also food for bugs and animals. So if you think about everything that this plant is doing, it is literally pulling all these other nutrient cyclers to it. And a lot of those weeds, one of their goals is to cover the ground as quickly as possible and start getting nutrition through those landscapes. So weeds are pretty fascinating in that perspective. So calcium is one of the nutrients that dandelions accumulate. And so ironically enough, a lot of times you'll see them in lawns where people have a tendency to use a lot of nitrogen fertilizer, which has a tendency to strip calcium from landscapes. And so it's funny how aggressively dandelions will grow in areas where you're doing a lot of lawn maintenance. And so it's just a fascinating thing that it's like they're telling us something about the landscape, and if we can kind of notice that or name that, we can work with them to get to the next level. You can also take weeds, chop them up, and ferment them or put them in a bucket of water for even just 24 hours and then water your garden with them as well, or use them as a mulch. So that's another way to kind of work with some of the weeds and what they have instead of working against them directly. But and we're also just noticing what they're telling us and just amending the soil accordingly. So any of those are great options. So as most of you know, plants photosynthesize, and I'm just going to go through this somewhat quickly, but they take sunlight and they take carbon dioxide and they turn it into sugars. And sugars, another way to think about them, they are liquid carbon, or it's a version of a carbon source that is in liquid form. It's a high energy source. It's extremely valuable to the plant, and yet the plants, so if you go to the next slide, they leak out a huge number of these plants. A really healthy plant will leak out tons of this extra extremely valuable sugar into the soil, and one of the questions is why. So it turns out on the next slide, they end up feeding huge quantities of microbes. Some of these are bacteria, some of these are fungi. They're all different types of things, and these microbes in turn give the plants kind of pre-assembled compounds that the plant can't access or cannot make on its own. So a plant is way more resilient when it has this community around it. So think about like if you're building a car and somebody, instead of assembling everything from nuts and bolts, somebody hands you an engine. It's just so much easier. So this is what these microbes do, is they pre-assemble and they give the plant special compounds to help it be extremely healthy. And a really healthy plant has this kind of relationship back and forth, and so you'll get like shiny leaves, you'll get really robust, vibrant green growth. You'll get a lot of compounds inside the plant that also help it resist certain pests and diseases as well. So an active relationship below ground as well as above ground, you get a much healthier and more resilient plant. Next slide. This is even cooler when you add in mycorrhizal fungi, which is all these little white threads, and these are a fungi that relate. They combine with plant roots and extend the reach of the plants way more than the plant itself. So this is again like they will access nutrients like rock. They can actually go into a rock and with very strong acids pull out minerals that will not show up on a soil test and give it to your plant in exchange for sugars. So these mycorrhizal fungi are unbelievable helpers in the garden, and also can support immune responses in the plants. So they can communicate if one plant gets a disease. If it's connected in this network, then it can actually signal for other plants nearby to have an immune response to resist some certain pest or disease pressure. And so it's just really, really cool. And this is what makes gardening unbelievably fun as well, to be able to kind of work with this giant system underground and know that you're doing this. So this goes even a step further on the next slide. If you are able to say like mulch or feed a carbon source, you're feeding even more of those microbes. A mulch could be a living mulch, or it could be any kind of soil cover that is able to kind of protect the soil from rain, from the elements, from wind. And then also something I just learned is when soil gets churned up, we used to think there was a nitrogen response, but it actually is more of a carbon response. And carbon kind of it's a very heavy molecule, and it'll kind of go up through the ground. So it's the more mulch that's there, it kind of just holds it steady, and it's a really incredible growth stimulant. So they'll pump it into greenhouses to get plants to grow much faster. But you can kind of do that by just roughing up your surface a little bit and keeping it protected, keeping it cared for, and you can kind of get a little bit of a way to manage your carbon in your soil. And the soil responds really strongly if you're able to do that. Just a little bit of that. So the next slide. So this is just an example of how you can use weeds. So this is lamb's quarters or goosefoot. This is a weed that is an early succession weed. It's usually indicative of a lot of organic matter in the soil. So you'll see it in farm fields and other things. And the thing that I find fascinating about this, beyond all the cool traits it has, including you can eat it and it's incredibly nutrient dense and all these other things. But when lamb's quarters is growing really strongly and really healthy, it's a very healthy or robust plant, you know that you are more bacterially dominant in the soil. And when you start getting lamb's quarters in your garden that are small and spindly, and all the bugs and the plants, actually you can kind of see the ones in the bottom corner, like they're not as strong as this one on the side. When you start getting lamb's quarters like kind of taken down by a lot of other things, it's one indicator that you're starting to shift to the next succession layer. This is also true with amaranth, which is an amazing weed. Again, nutrient cycler, they put out tons of seeds, feed birds, feed all sorts of things, but what they're trying to do, their goal is to get to that next succession level to where they're no longer needed. And so this is one of those plants that's an indicator. So if you see this around, it's not bad, but it's helpful to tell you where you are. And that can be really helpful. This is also a plant that's related to quinoa. It's a cool plant, but I just had to share that kind of using it as an indicator as well. And go ahead, next slide. Some ways to go from this early successional weeds to the next stage is one way is using backyard cover crops. So cover crops can have a little bit of a tricky name for themselves because they're hard to use. However, the way I like to use them, I actually really just stick with like 6 of them. One of them is daikon radish, peas, and buckwheat, and I just grow them as shoots. So I grow them early in the spring especially, or late in the fall and let them get winter killed over. But I just harvest them as young greens and just leave the roots in the soil. So that is a great way to just kind of harvest and chop down. I think the next slide, I'm not there yet, but we'll show that too. But it's leaving the roots in the soil is a great microbe food, and it's a great way to be able to feed that soil, kind of add that organic matter or that carbon into the soil as food for microbes. So anytime you're able to leave roots in the soil, even when you're kind of chopping like maybe plants back for the end of the season, if you can leave the roots in the soil, that's one way to increase the soil's level of resilience. And another way is also keeping living roots in the soil for as long as possible in the year. So what that does is you get that relationship happening with the microbes being fed literally sugars, and a lot of them can't exist if they don't have that some sort of relationship. So it takes them a while to recover if they get removed. You can also use weeds and insect pest diseases as indicators. So when you see something getting hit, what plant is it? Where is it in the successional lineup? And like just kind of noticing that, or maybe it's a call for the plant needs something specific, because insects are an incredible ally. Even the pests are just telling us something about what the plant needs. And so extremely healthy plants have ways of being able to resist pest and disease pressure. And so it's just really interesting to think about that. That's from an agricultural standpoint, but it also exists in the the wild, or I guess the woods as well. So thinking about something like the butternut, which is this really cool old tree that had a bacterial canker on the tree. It actually grows better when it's in sun or along the edge of a forest. And again, photosynthesis is what powers this entire thing. So that's just thinking about it from the basics again. Photosynthesis is what kind of powers the system, and how well these plants can use that sunlight and engage with the microbes underground is how they develop their resistance as well. So this is just a quick example as we're talking about early succession grasses and veggies. We're getting close to the 1-to-1 fungal to bacterial ratio, but we're not quite there yet. So we're still a little bacterial, but we're kind of moving on that spectrum to getting more fungally dominated. We're not quite there, still bacterially dominated. But this is just one example of how you might plant a garden. This is annual vegetables, but you can kind of imagine too, this also applies to different ways. For example, you might plant, even just noticing annual weeds that come up underneath perennial crops, and do they kind of add cover, and you can kind of grow them in. But this is just kind of thinking about how you build into like that soil structure every single season, or every time you plant. So ways to do this: feeding the soil more complex fungal foods to increase that fungal diversity. So one, seaweed is one really excellent compound that has lots of enzymes, and it's kind of harder to digest, and it has a lot of micronutrients. Wood chips are a carbon source, same with that. The more you can get the bark or the twigs of the wood chips, they have more mineral diversity in there. So even just that is enough to kind of sometimes shift the balance. Instead of just pure sawdust, is a lot of carbon. It's hard to work with. And so you can kind of, there's lots of different ways where you can move that trajectory, or you kind of can shift the dominant focus of your plants. Another really cool one is alfalfa meal. So alfalfa meal has the carbon to nitrogen ratio in the plant that mimics protozoa. So protozoa are a bacteria predator. So if you imagine a little tiny bacteria, it's high nitrogen, and protozoa come in, they have a higher carbon ratio, but what they do is they actually will eat your bacteria, and the more they eat them, the more you kind of release these nutrients in the soil. Protozoa are also a favorite food for higher order soil life, and so they inherently, just by being present, can jumpstart you from a bacterial to a more dominant fungal system. And so they are, alfalfa meal in particular, it's a nitrogen source, but it's a very good, gentle soil conditioner that helps encourage soil building in a way that a lot of other nitrogen sources don't. And so I'm a big fan of using low nitrogen sources, because nitrogen can be really harsh on the soil if there's too much of it. So in that same vein, synthetic fertilizers, things like Miracle-Gro or other things, can be very harsh on the soil because they're just too high, they're just too much, so they tend to kill off or break that connection between the plants and the soil. So they're just a little too aggressive. Some of them prematurely age soils and decrease the nutrient bank. So thinking about, as much as possible, using things that can support soil life. Organic fertilizers are a great way to go as well. But again, like lower nitrogen sources can really help.
Oh, sorry.
Go for it. No, you're good. I'm jumping through all this, so I'll leave the end for questions. But there's so much. But I had to pack in lots of nuggets because it's good stuff. Another, jumping on the line of succession a little bit more. This is the 1-to-1-ish bacterial to fungal ratio, kind of. There's lots of give, but there are a lot of kind of more mature grasses, a lot of cereal crops, things like that are spices or other things are kind of in this zone. And a really, really cool story that happened very close to where I am, about an hour and a half north of where I live in Philadelphia, is what happened at the Lehigh Nature Gap. So this is the next slide over. But they had a zinc refinery. So if you pop to the next slide, it'll show kind of the picture back and forth, but they had a zinc refinery that had a huge amount of smoke and other things that it was full of zinc and also lead, and it dropped onto this mountainside, and the one on the left is literally what it looked like for 70 years. And then 20 years ago, a handful of people from the local area, and this area was mined heavily for its carbon, so coal, to fuel Boston and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., like all these different major, New York, all these major cities on the East Coast. And so this area kind of got left with the intensity of industry. And a number of people came by, and what they did is they took these grasses, these really incredible early season as well as mid-season grasses, and they also got mushroom compost to add the biology, so mushroom substrate mixed with high quality compost, and then also lime, because the soil was so acidic. It had lost over 2 feet of topsoil from this entire mountainside, and in 20 years it became what is now on the right. And so it's an incredible story. If you want to see their video with more video footage, they found out that a lot of the roots that were buried deep underground of the trees were actually still alive, and the trees resprouted in 20 years, which is unbelievable. They now have turned it from a Superfund site to one of the first nature centers that is on a Superfund site. So it's just unbelievable. And part of it was these early succession grasses. They were able to jumpstart very quickly this succession level. So next slide. It's a really cool story, but it can happen on a big scale when you kind of get to know this. So fungi are unbelievable soil builders, as I've kind of talked about. This is on the left is a kit from North Spore. It's just a mushroom kit, but this is kind of how a lot of people will grow mushroom substrate or mushrooms indoors. But you can grow something like this and then use the leftover substrate and the enzymes inside that substrate. When it's done producing mushrooms and you've gotten all your mushrooms from a clean source, you can use this mixed with compost or just in general as a slow release fertilizer in your garden. Or you can do what I do and you can feed more compost to it and get more mushrooms. But once you're done with it and you want to stick it in your garden, those enzymes will literally rip apart organic pollutants. Things like oil or DDT or like crazy stuff. They literally rip apart carbon chains and into inert compounds. And they can even bind up heavy metals and other things. It's unbelievable. So you can harvest your mushrooms and remediate your soil too. And so it's just so cool what these plants can do. Fungi are unbelievable water filterers, and so they can also hold back nutrient runoff from streams and watersheds. So super, super cool. And allying yourself with fungi, like you can even see twine in there. They can eat up twine, no problem. They can eat up a lot of things. So it's a lot of fun. These are oyster mushrooms that, and they come in lots of different colors. Super cool. So some ways to kind of at this stage to think about increasing, and you might be at this stage and this is a great stage. If you're kind of trying to establish a meadow that's kind of at this area, it's possible that you want to add a little bit of disturbance in, like mowing once a year, or it doesn't have to go all the way to old growth forest, but kind of thinking about when you want to increase the fungal matter. How do you do that? Just knowing how you do that can help you. Any of these techniques will also work in getting you closer to this 1-to-1 ratio, which is a really great ratio for veggies, and a lot of veggies, and also a lot of these great crops that a lot of us love very much. You can make your own fertilizer with weeds. Things like stinging nettles are incredibly nutrient dense. So are carrot tops. So are a lot of things in the celery family. You can ferment them or just put them in a bucket of water, and you can use them to grow as well. Another thing you can do is actually use deep roots in your landscape as well. And so thinking about those plants and how they're leaking sugars, the deeper your root system, the deeper they are leaking the roots. And having a diversity of crops also does, they play off of each other. And so having a diversity of different plants, each one has a signature of microbes. And so being able to use that diversity, to increase your diversity underground, can really help with resilience as well. And then also like things like leaf litter or some of those complex, harder to digest things can work quite well too. This is the next layer of succession. There's some wonderful, wonderful edibles in there and also really plants that are extremely important for biodiversity as well. So a lot of the things that are edible for us are also really important for wildlife as well. And some of our local flavors are ones that we don't really have as much of a relationship with anymore. So like, for example, hawthorn, which is the one in the middle, just came into it's been coming into more and more studies for heart health, specifically cholesterol, and helping to combat high blood pressure and so it's just this incredible plant in the rose family that is also a small tree there it is. And it's like all these flavors and medicines and all sorts of things that are in our landscapes all around us that we used to have a relationship with historically in this part of the world, but we have lost it, some of our native plants at least. And so it's helpful to kind of tap into some of those flavors as a way to get to know who's in your landscape and how to support wildlife. So the next slide. So one thing I wanted to talk about, I know invasives, I know a lot of you at planting native plants are also kind of dealing with large swaths of non-native plants, which can be extremely aggressive, and they can sort of dominate landscapes. They can overrun the diversity, and they don't support a ton of insect biomass, so you get these ripple effects in the landscape, and they can be really, really challenging on many levels. And I think that it is really interesting to think about them and how, if we can look at them for what they're doing, I think we can more effectively oftentimes know how to bump forward in that succession level. So for example, Japanese knotweed is one of its in native habitats it's really good at coming up through lava flows in Japan. So think about like asphalt. It can just pop right through, and it's strong, and it's an early succession or an earlier succession plant. And it's a rapid soil builder. It has a very heavy flower set at the end of the year, which is when we oftentimes have lower amounts of nectar available to pollinators. And so it has a lot of these skill sets. And the other thing that is really wild is it stabilizes stream banks. So if you have a lot of erosion in an area or a lot of construction, Japanese knotweed can jump in construction sites, back lots, areas that have been sprayed, it can come back and come in really intensely, and it's really hard sometimes to get rid of. But the other thing that's really fascinating about it is that it holds nitrogen, and it's such a high level of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that it actually is very good. You can use it as a substitute for manure in some cases. So there's been some really interesting studies about that, of using fermented Japanese knotweed in place of manure on crops, because it has that high NPK, or nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And so it's just this fascinating plant. The roots are one of the highest levels of resveratrol, which is the same stuff in red wine. And so it's been used recently in studies around combating the symptoms of Lyme disease, which is weirdly right in the same range as Japanese knotweed. So it's just this fascinating plant, very challenging. And so next slide. If you look at it, so these are flowering Japanese knotweed plants along a stream. If I am looking at this area, it's not necessarily a great thing to have tons of Japanese knotweed there, but oftentimes these plants are trying to tell us something about what's happening. So my guess is that this stream bank probably has a lot of erosion. It probably has a lot of excess nitrogen runoff. And if you just got rid of the Japanese knotweed, it's not clear if the natives would be able to establish quite as well, unless you were able to pick natives that are also doing some of those same things. So for example, stabilizing stream banks, adding a late season pollen source. It could be a cluster of natives that are rapid soil builders, bringing back stuff and are able to pull excess nitrogen out of waterways. And so thinking about what these plants are telling us can really help us support landscapes more effectively too. So even the invasives can have something to say if we can kind of work with them as well in different ways. And so they're all giving us clues on what's happening in the landscape. And next slide. And so, for example, there's some really cool ways you can get rid of Japanese knotweed without chemicals by cutting back and basically bleeding the roots, and then establishing another layer on top of it as well. I'll come back to that later if we need to. We'll just keep going with the time-wise. So a couple things you can do to kind of add to this next level of succession is if you have plants in your yard, like think about blueberries, that are doing pretty well. One way you can do is actually to add these diversity of microbes that are more fungally dominant is find a really healthy blueberry bush somewhere in a neighborhood or in the woods and get a handful of that soil and literally just put it at the base of your own blueberries. So this works. That's a very simple way to introduce some of those diversity of microbes. You can also, there's lots of different ways to cultivate microbes. Korean natural farming is one practice that has a lot of different ways to culture indigenous microbes. Ramial wood chips are basically the tips and the twigs and all those places that have a little bit more material in them. And then there's also things like biochar, humates, or other things that can kind of add to the nutrient bank account or the capacity for the soil to hold nutrients longer. And those work particularly well when they're paired with that mineral base as well. So those are just a couple different things that you can use for this stage. And willows are one of those amazing, and elderberry both, are amazing soil stabilizers. They bloom at different times of the year, and you can just pop them into the ground in the spring, and they grow. So think about things that are fast, that are erosion resistors, things like that you can kind of use the same skills or the same things that Japanese knotweed, for example, or other invasives have, and then kind of adjust and plant accordingly as well. Old growth forest, there's some awesome, beautiful plants out there, again, that's really dense fungal diversity, but noticing what health looks like in your forests, whether or not, and knowing what the keystone species are. So for example, oak, as many of you know, I'm sure, is one of the highest, holds as many highest caterpillar counts as well. So you get this incredible songbird support when you're planting certain types of species. And so knowing what some of those key native species are in your area can really help boost things. Noticing kind of diversity of ages, all those different pieces can really help as well. And next slide. And then here's a neighborhood that I walked into, and it's just this huge single oak. It's not as big as the biggest oak ever in any areas, but there was no other oak in this area. And I just looked at this when I saw it, and I was thinking about the amount of carbon it holds down into the soil, the amount of birds it supports, just the sheer number of caterpillars, of songbirds, of the leaves, all the nutrients is drawing up from deep underground, the carbon mass that it's bringing down to build up the soil, all these different pieces. So having these incredible trees in our landscape, just going through a neighborhood and saying, how many oaks do I have? How many cherry? How many birch? Like some of these really keystone plants, just noticing if you have them in your landscape. And if you don't, or in a neighborhood, it's just really helpful to just kind of almost track it or chunk it like that and just see what's there and how they're doing. So look under their understory, see, are there a lot of early succession weeds growing around the base? Like that's an opportunity for building up the soil diversity to support these trees so that they continue to remain healthy as well. So next slide. So looking at plant communities in your area. So a lot of times I do this you can Google plant communities in Massachusetts or plant communities in Pennsylvania, and you can look up the dominant tree species, and it'll give you the canopy, the sub-canopy, and then also sometimes the understory or like subplants. And I go through there sometimes when I see a dominant tree community, and then just, is there anybody missing in my area? So if I have a dominant tree, they kind of set the tone for the landscape. who's missing, what are species are missing. So just noticing that, starting to build those skills. It takes a little while. It's like learning a language, but it's just really helpful. Tracking keystone species in your area, biodiversity surveys, and then learning how the land was kind of worked with historically as well. Because in many cases, a lot of indigenous land knowledge had these ways of managing or working with landscapes that increased the strength and diversity of the landscape as well, and kind of built that health over time as well. So it's just fascinating kind of looking at those pieces and trying to scrape together some of that information. Next slide. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Soil building basics. Very quickly. Next slide. They are pretty simple. Keeping the soil covered and protected. So thinking about your armoring the soil, minimizing disturbance, keeping living roots in the ground for as much of the year as possible. That's a great one. Planting diversity above ground. So you have the signature of microbes, all the diversity below ground. It adds diversity below ground. And then the last one is incorporating animals as nutrient cyclers. So if you go to the next slide, all sorts of animals can be nutrient cyclers, including your house wrens. I've actually seen people grow soil under bushes that have tons of sparrows in them. They push the leaves up underneath them, and then the sparrows swoop down, and like basically all the leaves turn into soil at the end of the year. It's crazy. So you can be creative about how you kind of manage nutrient flows. Migrations are also incredible nutrient flows that come through our areas and bring nutrients here and there. So being prepared and welcoming different migrations of animals, whether they're the fish in the rivers or also some of these incredible birds and creatures as well. So the next slide. This is I think anybody can grow right where they are, and it can be small, it can be nimble. A couple years ago, I ended up starting a micro nursery. I had a lot of, as you can see, tomatoes and things, but I also did a lot of perennial native plantings, and it was during the pandemic, and I kind of just jumped up, and I realized, there's it's just incredible power in focusing right where you are. Next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Excellent. Yeah, no worries. I'm like used to popping them forward.
Yeah.
So
Is that right? Is this right?
Oh, the next one.
Oh, okay.
You got it. There's a bunch of pictures towards the end here. But it doesn't have to be large to be incredibly impactful. A lot of small scale restoration a lot of times starts in small ways. And so, for example, the next slide has the picture of these are blight resistant chestnut species these are wild ones. They're not but yeah, so it's just fascinating to think about these different pieces, and you can actually grow all these different tree species in as little as 1 square foot. There's a really cool growing technique called air pruning. It's done by this one guy at Silver Tree or Twisted Tree Farm in Ithaca, New York, and he actually is able to get a higher planting success rate by doing something called air pruning. So definitely worth checking out. This is just, I have this here. We'll send the links, and I'm happy to send them out later on, but this is just a bunch of really inspiring restoration stories of building soil from almost nothing around the world. So from China, Saudi Arabia, Seattle, Washington, Dead Sea around Jordan, like all of these are just unbelievably inspiring. They're also pretty short videos, so if you need an inspiration, check them out. But you can grow soil, we can grow soil way faster than we thought possible and get those things cycling. Many of these epic restoration stories literally started with a small nursery. And so and a small nursery you don't need a lot of space for if you're growing woody perennial crops. They actually like dappled shade, so you don't even need a lot of sun. And so it's really cool how much you can do in a very small space. So 2 slides forward. You were perfect on that. That was amazing.
Is it one more or do this one?
Perfect. That's exactly it.
Okay.
So seeds can look like a lot of different things, but it's just something that I invite you to just think about for yourself. what it looks like, and I actually, as I am rethinking or kind of diving into a reworking of what I think of as the Sparrow Underground. So the Sparrow Underground for me is, I call a lot of people who are doing restoration around the world sparrows. They don't tend to be in the limelight. They don't tend to stand out, but they're in every ecosystem, every biome. And once you realize you're surrounded by incredible people who are working very quietly and humbly, oftentimes around the world, it's incredibly inspiring to be a part of it. And what does that look like? What can we do right in our backyards? Friendly neighborhood soil consultants in the street corners. I don't know. Who knows what it is? It's just been an inspiring idea that I've been just fascinated by. Next slide. So this is just an example of just lots of plants. Working with a lot of different gardeners. So for example, one of the things we did is I worked with some gardeners who had extras of various native plantings, and we would repot up a ton of different plants and then get them around in different areas. So things like swamp milkweed seedlings in preparation for the monarch migration. It just felt really good to get tons of these plants out and about in the landscape, and a lot can happen in a small area. Next slide. So I think there's just 2 quotes.
Oh,
I think.
I'm sorry. Oops, I'm sorry.
This is perfect. That was great. One more.
Okay.
Seedlings. We just grew tons of them. And then there's just 2 quotes. So this one was by Vandana Shiva, and it's basically this idea that no matter how tough the situation, I believe that if you just do your little bit without thinking of the bigness of what you stand against, if you turn to the enlargement of your own capacities, just that in itself creates new potential. So this idea of how do we build up this kind of momentum and potential? And it's easy to get discouraged looking at the bigness of everything going on, but this idea of building up kind of that potential right where we are can be such a powerful concept. And then the next quote is one by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and the main concept that I'll just get across here is this idea of that despair is paralysis, and this idea of restoration as a way to heal not only our landscapes but also ourselves as well. And there's this incredible opportunity it's just inspiring work, it's fulfilling work, and being able to really actively work with landscapes and be in relationship with landscapes, even the crazy invasives, which we are still working on, but this idea of that every plant has something to say, and they're allies, even if we're trying to get rid of them. But this idea of how do we work alongside this landscape and create that kind of healing both in landscapes that are heavily degraded and also kind of on ourselves as well. So, and then finally, I think the last slide is just my information, but it's a kind of a whirlwind, but this idea of that just incredibly inspiring, starting right with the soil at your feet, looking at the ground, what you have right with you, and just getting a sense for where you're at, getting to know different types of plants, what they're saying, kind of what nutrients they're accumulating. There's a lot of different cool resources out there to dive deeper into what that looks like, but I think I find it incredibly inspiring just to lean into that piece and then go from there. So I'll use that. I guess I'll end in that with that thought.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing and open it up to questions. I don't know. I couldn't follow the chat. Do people want to raise their hand, or are there questions in the chat?
There are 2 questions in the chat. The first one is from Dale. What about invasives such as garlic mustard, which is rampant now? Should we chop it up, soak it, water with it?
Oh.
Yes. Garlic mustard is an interesting one. So mustards, and this is also true, so brassicas, like radish, for example, a lot of them are, they have a really cool property where they sort of suppress growth around them. So you can use it for suppressing weeds, and a lot of farmers use daikon radish, for example, to kind of just in the fall, they'll plant them like little tiny seedlings, and it'll prevent the next weed flush for the spring. And so it's one way you can do kind of this little piece. And so it's just
radishes.
Technique you can use. Garlic mustard has that same effect. So it's in the brassica family, but it is actually I think it is actually because I know it's one of those. Yeah. So anyway, garlic mustard is a really it's very dominant. It tends to just to kind of grow very rapidly and then kind of dominate the plant communities. So it is more of a yeah, brassicas are the one that you just have to be a little bit careful of because they can dominate. However, even garlic mustard, they found a couple of interesting studies that the colonies tend to go for about 20 to 30 years and then they actually shift. And so that's usually the length of the amount of time that they go, and then they actually start dying back a little bit too. So I think that there's more to know from succession in those communities. So that's something else that is, I'm also every single little invasive I'm trying to learn more about, but that's one of those ones that they're extremely rich in vitamin C, like extremely high. And so even just chewing on the leaves as you're walking in the woods it's a huge, it's like something like, anyway, the quantity compared to even oranges, it's way higher than a lot of our fruits. So it's a fascinating one, but I probably wouldn't break up garlic mustard because it has more of that suppressing quality.
So before we go to live questions, someone also posted, can the links to the incredible success stories be emailed to us?
Sure. Yeah. I'll take that page from the slides, I guess.
I can do a one pager, or I can also give you, if you'd like, I'm happy to share a set of the slides as well. So if that would be interesting. Also, all the stories are on the resource page of my website. So you can go there if you want. There's a whole list of restoration stories. So those are just a handful, but there are so many more, and they're really inspiring. But there's a restoration link in the resources. It's at plant suppliers, lawn alternatives, all sorts of different things. If you see anything it's not on there, it should send me a note. But those stories are on there as well.
Great, thank you. I know Michelle Owishi had her hand up. Michelle, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, hi. You had mentioned, Allison, at the beginning of your talk, when you were talking and describing the soils and describing how mulch on top was useful, and you were describing, I'm going to say, agitating or churning up stuff a little bit, and I was confused because I feel like in general I've read not to disturb the soil. So can you revisit and explain that particular slide?
So the way to one of the ways to build soil is, if you're going to use something like heavy with a lot of carbon, is not to disturb the soil at all. So you want to kind of do that. So if you're going to do that layering of wood chips and compost and other things, it works if you don't churn up the soil. So it works really well if you kind of are able to keep that soil steady for a certain amount of time. And then same with especially a woody or carbon-rich mulch on top, that can work if you don't break up kind of churn up the soil. If you do churn up the soil, you are risking like kind of breaking up a lot of those different things. Every time you break up the soil, it is a carbon release. And so farmers do that because they see a growth response. You can do it, you can kind of protect the soil without doing that and build up kind of those carbon reserves. But when you're digging up the soil, that activity does have a flush of carbon dioxide. You're losing it from the soil, but you do sometimes get a growth response for a time. It's like a short-term gain for a long-term loss. So that's why farmers do it, but it's it's not great for your carbon reserves long term. And so I don't know if that helps clarify that.
I think it was, and I'm sorry, I can't turn my camera on, but it was your third or fourth slide in the soil building exercise, and I feel like it was not wood chips necessarily, but leaf mulch.
Oh,
And
okay. This might have been the lasagna mulch. Is that right?
no, it was before that.
Was
Anyway,
okay. Let me just pull up from myself, and I can describe that. Um, it was before that. Let's see. Was actually I don't have much before that one. Um, anyway, if you actually
I was going
was
to say, let's leave
looking
it.
at the topsoil or kind of digging a hole to see what the soil looks like.
Yeah, let's just leave it. But I didn't want to interrupt you, obviously, while
Oh,
you
no
were
worries,
talking.
no
So
worries. Yeah,
anyway,
no,
thank you. This was very, very interesting.
Hi, this is Stuart. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can't figure out how to raise my hand here. So may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so in Williamsburg, we have used to be a dump. Now we call it a transfer station. And people bring their brush and wood chips and God knows what else is in there. But for years, it sits and then it turns to a rich black thing that I've been bringing home by the pickup truckloads. I've probably brought home like 10 pickup truckloads. And I'm concerned. What's the most economical way I can figure out what else I need to put in this to grow things? God knows what kind of chemicals or whatever might be in there, but I'm more concerned that it's not like, for example, my wife put tomatoes in it, and I don't know. I thought maybe I didn't dig her raised garden deep enough, and they didn't look that good. Things like that have given me an indication I'm devoid of something.
Yeah, sometimes if there's a lot of compost in it, so if they mix it with any kind of manure, sometimes it's very heavy bacteria dominant. I don't know, and it could be a number of different things. But if your tomatoes, you're having a little bit of something in there, it could be there are pesticide residues. Usually, if you have a very active biology, then you do kind of bind up some of those different pieces. I will say also that when we were talking about soil, the one time that I would definitely recommend breaking up the soil is actually if you have a compaction layer. So if you have a compaction layer deep down, or if you have some way that the soil is not getting air in there and giving it enough kind of air to breathe, and then also kind of getting the water and the nutrients down there can be really, really. So that's one way. One way that farmers do it is actually use what's called a subsoil plow, which is it's like a plow that they basically sink below the ground. And so instead of churning up the soil profile, they'll kind of break up lower down. And that's one way to restore soils that have a very heavy kind of clay area. So maybe that. I don't know if you can also. If you want to, this is more of a techie version, but you could use a friend with a microscope and just see if you have a diversity of soil biology. You could add something like alfalfa meal and just see if you can jumpstart, if you have a lot of bacteria, kind of jumpstart feeding some of those fungal foods, seaweed, things that are a little bit more diverse that can help just break things up a little bit and support it.
I'd been thinking of cover crops, hoping that would add whatever the soil is missing, but I
Yeah.
guess I'll have to read more about it to kind of figure out. Like, for example, Southborough Gardening Native Plant Society gave me 126 different seed packets, and over the winter I germinized them in milk buckets, and I'm getting ready to plant them, and I'm a little concerned that I don't plan to use much of this soil, but I'm a little concerned I won't be feeding them properly.
Yeah, it's one of the things that the plants do is they mobilize a lot of nutrients, so they kind of build things up. And so, one cover crop that's very easy, it's pretty inexpensive, that I love are peas. And you can grow field peas. They're pretty cheap sometimes. You can get them sometimes as if you have like a co-op bulk supplier, you can get like 5 pounds for $5. That used to be the case. That was a while ago. But you can just grow a bunch of them. They die back in the summer for the heat, and make a great mulch. And they also can mobilize different pieces in the soil.
When would
But
you plant them? When?
if you want,
Now? You
At
mean around the other things I'm
yeah,
planting?
if
Oh,
you
I thought for the winter. Okay.
yeah, if you wanted to as a cover crop for now, also growing. I like to, for backyard cover crops, I like to stick with mostly annuals, and so that they winter kill over. And that seems to work pretty well. If you want to go the next level with cover crops, you can do things like rye and other things. They are really cool what they can do for the soil. However, they can sometimes quickly, especially in a backyard, become a weed. And so it's really, you have to be able to successfully kill them to have them work, which is tricky. So that's the trick with cover crops. So there's the annuals that you can eat, are amazing, easy kind of starters, and then as you go a little bit further, some of them can get a little tricky. And you have cool season ones that love the cool weather, and also warmer season ones. So you can kind of try them out if you want in that way too. And I personally love it if you can also eat it as well. But so it's like does double duty. But you don't have to get a yield necessarily to
Would you
have it.
test? Would you consider testing? I'm not far from UMass.
You could. You can totally test. I would say you may not, if you have a large amount already, you could test it, and you might get some interesting information there. Yeah, I'd say also just if you're able to get that, it sounds like to me likely it's more bacterially dominant than is what is needed. And another way you can check that is if you see whatever types of weeds tend to pop up in that soil as well, if you're getting weeds. So that's another piece. If you're not getting any weeds, that also would be a concerning thing to me.
Getting weeds. Getting weeds.
Okay, that's good. Do you know what type of weeds?
Well, one I saw, there was a lot of Japanese, I forgot what it was called. I don't know. I had that, and I saw it at the transfer station, and then the next thing you know, it was at home.
Purge? Is that
I'm sorry?
purge? It's like an understory.
I'm not sure. It was very small little two ferns and two spikes would start out that way, and then it would get bigger. I can't think of any other.
Yeah, that's actually a great point though, is another way that I like to, if I'm new to a landscape or new to a patch of soil, what I'll do is I'll actually identify the weeds, and usually I'll do it with the free app, iNaturalist, or one of those other plant ID apps. Find out what the plant is, and then there's a really, really cool resource also on my website, but I could send it off as well to Jean. But it's called, actually I put it in the chat as well, but it's called Dr. Duke's ethnobotanical and phytochemical database, but it's through the USDA, and it's just accumulation. Dr. Duke apparently is this guy who basically accumulated a bunch of different research studies about how things were used historically, but then also all their phytochemical nutrients. It's clunky, but if you want to skim through and see what those weeds have in them, you can sometimes get it's not every weed on there, and it's not, it's really low on invasives, which is frustrating, so somebody needs to get on that. But there's a lot of really interesting information on there, and so it's just one other tool to have in your back pocket to look up what those things are accumulating. You can also look at what environments those weeds prefer. There's a couple different nutrient profiles for each weed group, or what they like to grow in, where you see them in other environments, can give you a lot of information as well. So that's just like a few places to start. My guess would be the organic, if the soil is very dark, like rich black almost, my guess would be that organic matter is probably sky high. And it's possible that is blocking. Sometimes if the organic matter is extremely high, it can actually block phosphorus, zinc, all these other nutrients that are or if the phosphorus is really high. And another way you can test that is if you have certain plants growing like lettuce or zucchini or clover, and if you try some of these plants and they're bitter, like the lettuces come out bitter, that can be a sign of too much phosphorus, which is very likely, is what my guess would be. It's just too much and it's blocking nutrients. So a soil test would be a great option. UMass is great, and they have a weak acid test, which means that it gives you just a little bit. It's like a spectrum of what's there. University of Maine has a strong acid test, and so you just get a larger what's in the bank account a little bit more. So those are two different options. They'll give you recommendations, and you can kind of go from there. You don't have to know a ton about the stuff there, but it's sometimes helpful to just see if anything's out of whack, for sure.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation.
Are there other questions, Brucey? Because I have one if there aren't.
Yes, we do have a question, Jean.
Okay.
Does growth of mushrooms indicate high fungal content in the soil?
That's a good question. So some mushrooms, not always is the answer, which is not helpful, but it feels like it's frustrating sometimes. But yeah, when you see mushrooms, you are getting fungal matter. Some mushrooms do grow really well in like compost, like straight up compost, which is very highly bacterially dominant, or it can be. So generally it is a good indicator that there is fungal matter. You don't get a clear answer on how strong that fungal presence is, but it's there. So that's a good sign. That is diversity is there is really good. So, and they're oftentimes have really weird characteristics, like, so wine cap mushrooms have the capacity to hunt parasitic nematodes. Like, so it's just very cool. Like, they'll literally make these little loops and they'll, anyway, get them in and then they'll grab them. And it's just wild. So there's a lot of crazy things that happen in the soil. And once you add fungi, you get a lot of benefits. So, yeah.
And a follow-up question by the same person. Preetha, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yes, so what you're describing, Allison, is that pure compost. So for example, if you make compost with leaves and your food scraps and so on, that's actually very high in bacterial content rather than fungal content. Am I correct in understanding that?
I would say that the more diversity you add into your compost, the higher the diversity of food stuff. So compost can vary extremely widely. It can be almost entirely bacterially dominant, or the best types of compost have a certain element of the fungal structure. So if you have things like leaf litter in there, or other like kind of a little bit harder to break down components or elements, that is amazing. And so that becomes really incredible stuff. And one of the ways you can tell is by the smell. So if you have a really terrible smelling compost, that is usually not a positive indicator. You want a kind of a sweet smelling, rich, and that's a little bit of that indicator of that that positive thing, as well as the materials that go in. So if you can get those fungal foods in here, then that's awesome.
Right. So leaf mold would be, if most of it is leaf mold, then that's probably very fungally dominated then, right?
There's a lot. Sometimes for just straight up leaf mold, sometimes you get super wet, soggy layers, and you get this like where it goes anaerobic or has too little air, and so you get some funky, not so great stuff in there. But usually, it can be really excellent. So, generally, yes.
Okay, great. So now my question earlier about the mushrooms as an indicator, because a lot of the things that you describe is about sort of like an indicator, like the Japanese knotweed indicates too much nitrogen and so on. So so I basically tried to, smother my devil strip so that I could grow some native plants in there. And what I did is I did it in the fall so that it would just sit there all winter. And instead of just doing the sheet mulching with cardboard with compost on top, all the leaves were falling. So instead of picking them up, I just suppressed, because I thought, well, it's going to kill all the grass, because, if you leave leaves on your grass, it typically kills grass. So I put all the leaves. I kind of made a pretty thick layer of leaves, and then the cardboard, and then some soil and compost, and it created some very rich soil. But I have a lot of mushrooms growing there, and that's why I was kind of trying to ask the question of whether it was indicative of a soil biology, which is more bacterial, as you described, sort of in the earlier stage of soil building, as opposed to fungal, which is sort of in the later stage of soil building, where, plants and trees grow very successfully, right?
So
I
you're
understand it.
doing amazing stuff. That is really good. So one of the things you're doing that is amazing is getting that. Again, you're kind of jumping a lot of succession layers, and so you're building in that those complex materials, and so that's one of the ways, like heavily smothering Japanese knotweed sometimes with wood chips, for example. It not only kind of builds in a carbon source, which fungi love. So fungi are some of the only organisms that can break down lignin in like woody materials, and so they are required for breaking down a lot of carbon-rich things, and so that's what they're needed in that place. And so you're basically jumping forward a lot, and if you get a really heavily fungally dominant area, you're kind of, it's not as great for Japanese knotweed longer term. Remember, it's kind of an earlier succession plant. It likes that disturbance, and so you're actually slowly going out of its zone even, which is fascinating. So well done.
Yeah, I don't have Japanese knotweed. I just had sort of grass
Okay.
and the devil. Yeah, I didn't have Japanese knotweed. It was just the devil strip.
Oh,
Uh,
yes. Okay.
the house strip next to the street.
Gotcha.
Uh, I think I called it devil strip. Maybe I meant to call it health strip.
House strip. That's a good
Yeah,
name.
the health strip. Yeah.
House strip. Maria Bartlett has her hand up.
Okay.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry. I can't enable my video for some reason. I had a lot of soil tests done in my grass, which is all organic, and in my gardens. And everything was really high in phosphorus. I mean, really high. And I don't know exactly what that means I'm doing wrong.
So a lot of times things get, so just so you know, and was the soil testing through University of Massachusetts?
No, it was Waypoint in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
I mean, it's a really good quality lab.
I know sometimes, and then I guess oftentimes when people add a lot of, if you've added a lot of compost over the years,
I have.
that sometimes has and also manure has
No manure, compost though.
sometimes has the biology that makes phosphorus more bioavailable, and then same compost can do that too. So sometimes you have a very bioavailable thing. If it was in University of Massachusetts recently, they updated their phosphorus thing and they bumped it down to, so anyway, the phosphorus, extremely high phosphorus level was easier to achieve in a couple years recently. So, but oftentimes like gardens are sometimes sky high in phosphorus.
Yeah,
And
mine were like in the way over. So what am I supposed to do?
some cover crops, for example, that can kind of bind up some of those excess.
I can't do cover crops in my lawn.
Also, the lawn itself are like sometimes like those grasses, like so a diversity of grasses can be one way to kind of keep that landscape going. You can also just, I think, mobilizing different. So actually, when you did the soil test, did you have really low calcium or sulfur or anything like that? I don't know if
I'd have to go back and look about the calcium. I'd have to go check why.
And so if that's the case, sometimes anyway, sometimes you can get funky imbalances because of the super high phosphorus.
Yeah.
So, what I would do is I'd stop adding extra compost in that specific area, and then trying to build up those buffers. So building up the carbon sources, and then also in some cases you can use soil amendments as well. So things like gypsum is a really soil conditioner that can help with excesses. It's a excellent type thing. Also, if you want to add nitrogen without adding excess phosphorus, things like alfalfa meal are wonderful soil builders. So if you phosphorus, oftentimes, if you have a lot of bacteria, sometimes they are more um, active in the so they're those higher phosphorus things. So again, sort of transitioning that landscape or kind of shifting over. So potentially soil amendments could be a really great way to go for just supporting that transition a little bit. And also you can note weed wise what's growing and what is doing really well, whether you intend to or not, and kind of see, you can grade your attempts by that as well.
Well, the area where I'm particularly concerned is one where it was grass. I put down cardboard and then
Yeah.
covered with wood chip, and I'm planting in it. And that's the area that's really, really high in phosphorus.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. And that was just wood chips. And
Yeah,
wow,
I didn't
wow.
put any compost down. So
That's
I
really
wondered if there was something in the cardboard that was high in phosphorus.
cardboard can sometimes have funky micronutrients in it, but
Yeah.
usually not.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just really weird. I don't understand it. Yeah, it must be that I did a lot of compost before.
yeah. Sometimes having a broad spectrum of micronutrients can help buffer that. But it is, and it also if you've churned up stuff sometimes too.
Yeah.
But it's tricky. It's really, really tricky when you get some of those different pieces. Have you noticed any kind of like excess weeds or anything like that in certain areas?
Well, there's not too much growing on the wood chips. I mean, I get dandelions occasionally, but
Yeah.
they're not.
We have another question. Brucey Moulton has her hand up.
Thank you.
Quick question. Yes. Any suggestions for dealing with creeping bellflower, Campanula rapunculoides?
Ooh, I don't know that one very
Oh,
well.
it's evil. It's an invasive, it's a non-native invasive, and sometimes it pops up in plant swaps. It has very pretty flowers. Once it gets established, it's the dickens to get rid of.
That's wild. I would say that I don't actually know that one quite as well, but you could also try. And this is again, it may not work. You can try actually pulling up a bunch of it, soaking it, and spraying it with itself. And sometimes that people have. There's one woman who's a soil consultant from Australia who has been playing around with some really fascinating ways of getting rid of invasive plants as well as various weeds. And she does that for a handful of things, but that was one technique, and I have not tried that directly, but I was very impressed with that. Another really interesting one that can work, or it can definitely bite you in the foot if it's not true, is sometimes a lot of landscapes, especially on the East Coast, are very deficient in boron, or we have a lot of rain that washes through the soil, and so sometimes a lot of landscapes are deficient in boron. Um, but it also, in large quantities, is it can be used as a weed killer. But so it'll overwhelm a plant and kill it back. But then in the long term, support the soil. And boron is one of the easiest sources is borax, which you can get in the grocery store. It's sodium borate. But some people will spot apply instead of something like Roundup or other things on certain plants in the sun. However, if you have a particularly resistant weed, you can sometimes explode the growth of that weed. So just go slow if you try that. So it sometimes can overwhelm a weed, but then also restore a healthier level of boron to the soil long term. So that's kind of an interesting thing to try, but go slow and experiment. I
Thank
don't know
you.
if anyone has those, but that's a tricky one. There are a lot of invasives that are really tricky to get rid of or kind of get a handle on.
I have a question about planting a shade garden in an area that didn't even have the trees that used to sponsor the shade plants. So many of the native plants that we see are part of a plant community, foam flower,
Yeah.
bleeding heart and things like that. Is it advisable? So you don't have the tree there, but you do have the shade. is it
Yeah.
advisable to create the plant community right away to encourage the building of the soil?
I mean, a lot of the plants, they have a natural way, or they have a natural set of conditions that they thrive the best in. And so if you are able to somehow create a little bit of those conditions, and in some cases, if you're able to find kind of a wild equivalent. So, for example, some of the same plant families that live, you can get their wild counterparts. That is a way to do it. Or even just a garden that has some of those plants that are thriving and really extremely alive and doing well. Getting some of that soil is one way to support that. You can, but it is tricky to kind of find some of those things. I think especially shade, and if it's dry shade too, that can be particularly tricky, I think, for some plants to get established. So again, that soil building, if you're able to bump up the soil biology and the complexity in the soil, sometimes you can get just a little bit more fungal biomass that also does help with the water storage as well. So that's just one extra idea. It may not be exactly what you're looking for.
What if you need more acid? I heard recently that the water we use, if it comes from a hose, is diluting the acid in our soil. Is that true?
I know, at least farms, by the end of the year, when the water table is dropped, you actually get a completely different spectrum of soil, and some people have to add sulfuric acid back to when you're in large scale crop areas of the season versus, and just to moderate that influence.
Nice.
It's crazy. But one way you can do that potentially, that can kind of a little bit of a buffer, is adding something like humates. Can sometimes bind up some of those different nutrients. So humates it's like almost like a conditioner, that it's like a way of helping bind up micronutrients in the soil. So it's a plant amendment. It's found in a lot of garden soils as a granular or liquid. But a liquid humate, sometimes people use that to bind up chlorine. And you don't need a lot, but you can just use a couple drops. And that's something that can support that landscape. Also, fulvic acid, some of those different, they're oftentimes derived from older carbon sources. So usually there are a lot of minerals that, like coal and other things, that have this very, very nice structure for building large amounts of plants and kind of improving the nutrient holding capacity of the soil. But they're also very good at binding up some of those nutrients and buffering some of those qualities. So that can be one way. But yeah, I've definitely, greenhouse growers in particular struggle with it if they're heavily irrigating an area. That water is really rough, or it can be.
So we have a question from Elaine Crowder.
And then maybe we're going to have to call it. I don't know. It's
Yes.
after 9, but
Yes.
Go ahead, Elaine. Elaine?
It
says I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it.
Oh.
So I can't start my video. But I was going to ask about, I have one of these, I think somewhat dryish shade woodlands that recently had a couple of big limbs pulled out of the area. So this is getting more sun. And was happy to find that there are 2 natives that really kind of are doing ground cover work for me. The thicket creeper, a relative of Virginia creeper, which doesn't have the pad climbing structures, but an inserta climbing structure, and also violets.
Oh, nice.
So I'm wondering, do those combinations tell me something about the soil? And my strategy has been to kind of begin to pull back some of those things in areas that I'm trying to create more diversity. And what plants you would suggest in that situation.
And I definitely would want to bow to the incredible amount of expertise in this room too, in terms of like direct plant things. But I will say violets are fascinating. They're legumes. They're nitrogen. They're
No,
also
they do nitrogen fix. I didn't know that. Great.
I think they have relationships with the different microbes. There are also free-floating nitrogen-fixing microbes as well that respond more if you have a certain blend of micronutrients in the soil, like molybdenum is one of the nutrients. Anyway, so just kind of a funny. So if you have a more mineralized mix in the soil, that can kind of shift different nutrient capacity, I guess. But violets are, I think, a great understory plant. They are, host plant for the fritillary butterfly, and just really cool in general. And I would say they are further along in the weed section. And one thing I would just recommend is noticing where I think other areas that have a lot of violets, especially on maybe the edges, and just noticing some of the different plant communities, especially in more wild violet populations. And so if you get any information from some of those, like kind of in your area or localized there, you said, what are some of your dominant tree species?
In that back woodlands, there is hickory.
Oh.
A little bit farther, or a very big hickory. A little bit farther over is a cottonwood. And then, of course, we have a very large Norway maple, and a little bit of oak in one section of the small woodlands.
So that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, cottonwood is an earlier succession. Hickory is a more mature, a little later. So it's just interesting, kind of this in between area. But yeah, I would. That's a fascinating area. I would have to know more about kind of some of the different spaces in there. And what was the other plant? It was violet and
thicket creeper, a close relative of Virginia creeper.
Oh, nice. Nice.
And there is also a lot of English ivy, which I've been trying to gradually begin to kind of pull back and allow the thicket creeper to grow into, and it seems to be holding its own against the English ivy. It tends to get a little taller than English ivy, so I think it shades it out a bit too.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
For inspiration, again, looking at the plant communities list is just one way to kind of, it's a lot of information, but sometimes it's a way to kind of look at, and again, that canopy layer, understory canopy. So like if you want more shrubs or more different types of vines, or like, and thinking about it in those categories. So like thinking about ground cover crops, some of those vining crops or bushy crops that can kind of fill those places. It's a great way to get inspiration and kind of just pull up some ideas as well, because there are a huge number of different wonderful tree species, and kind of specifically, the more you can adapt it to your landscape and the soil conditions in your area, and then kind of with those tree communities underneath, the more you're able to have success in that area. There's a fascinating guy, Mark Shepard, who many of you probably know, but he does permaculture on a larger scale in the Midwest. But one of the things that he talks about is he actually goes into plant community areas, or looks up plant communities, and then tries to find some of the edibles. That's his goal. But there's so many incredible useful plants, and also in many cases there's a lot of missing species in our different zones. And so just kind of being able to kind of think about it in that way, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it might give you some inspiration to kind of find out who are some of the players that would go really well with those species. So yeah, that's great though. Violets I think are usually great. It's a great sign. And they have seeds that ants plant because they have a little nutrient coating. So I just find that such a fascinating, they're
one of the things I have noticed in the open space area across the street from me is that there's an area that had violets and garlic mustard. And the last time I was back there, I did some pulling of the garlic mustard. The last time I was back there, I could barely find any garlic mustard. The violets won. I see violets like duking it out a lot with garlic mustard.
And we don't entirely understand garlic mustard, so yes, it can dominate, like a lot of brassica type plants do. However, it's possible that we don't have a strong sense of what it's doing in the succession. So like, is it clearing an opening? And like, because it has a very interesting relationship with microbes underground. It doesn't. It kind of is anti-mycorrhizal fungi. However, that is true for cover crops too, and they're used very specifically. Those brassica cover crops are used for that effect, and they're finding they do have relationships with fungi. It's just different than the other plants. And so I'm kind of curious to learn more about garlic mustard, because it's not quite cut and dry. And so there's a possibility that they actually are space openers that last for a time, and possibly just they shift succession and maybe a different direction, but there's something going on there that is a little bit more complex than what I quite understand. So
I will jump in at this point. I think maybe Jean and I are both about to say the same thing, that this has been a fantastic presentation and wonderful to get so many questions answered. And we could keep going on, but it's undoubtedly time to wrap it up.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you all. This was such a treat.
It was too for us. Love your knowledge and enthusiasm. And by the way, everyone, these were hand painted. All the illustration was painted by you, right? So you have quite a talent, and it's lovely to see your slides. Thank you. I have recorded this, and I guess you and I can talk about sharing the slides, the best method, if it can be.
Yes, a lot of the resources, they are on my website on the resources page, if that's helpful. Now I can put that link just really quickly in the chat for anybody who grab that. And it's always looking for bulking up that page as well, because it's just helpful to get more of this information out there. So I'll just pop that. So,
well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great evening. Thanks everyone for sticking in here, and I hope you're happy gardening. I hope you're enlightened. All right. All right. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Jean,
Yeah.
Jean, when are you going to distribute the link to the video?
To the video? I guess I have to. It's happening now, and then I wasn't going to widely distribute it. I thought people were going to ask me for it.
Oh, okay.
Do you want it?
Yeah, David Morgan wanted it. He couldn't be here, so he wanted to see it.
Okay. All right. I can send it to him.
And Allison, just so you know, David Morgan is our superstar environmental planner and conservation agent here in Arlington, Massachusetts. And we are very fortunate to have him on board.
Oh, that's incredible. There's so many wonderful people in your area. I just am continually impressed with the Mystic River and everything that's happening there. I still follow and I get all the updates and everything. I just really, I don't know, it's very inspiring. So, yeah.
Well,
I just want to say again, your talk was inspiring.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was really great. So
a lot of work in progress, but it's been really inspiring to connect with so many people who are really passionate about this, and I do feel like there's more and more people. So it's been a real pleasure. So thank you.
All right, great. Well, we'll stay in touch, and we'll get these slides out and everything. Terrific. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. Jean.